Today we're making something that I think a lot of people consider to be the white whale, the holy grail of ramen. I've seen a lot of your comments and I know you've been asking for it. So here we go, Tonkotsu ramen. Okay, I say today we're making it, but that's a little bit of a lie because tonkotsu ramen is not something that you can really do in one day if you want to do it properly. I know restaurants that do it over 4 days. We're not going to go quite that long, but we're going to do a 2-day method here. The first day is really quite simple. We've got our kotsu here, our bones. Tonkotsu means pork bone. So we're essentially just making a pork bone broth to be the soup of our ramen. We have a few other things to come, but they'll come tomorrow. For our soup, we've got pork backbone and some pork trotter as well. The part of the animal you choose will depend kind of how your ramen not just taste, but the mouthfeel as well, because certain areas like the trotter will have a lot more gelatin and give you a much kind of richer and lip smackier mouthfeel to it. I've got 2 trotters and about 3 kilos of bones. It's roughly about 5 kilos all up of pork bones here. I'll put those into my nice big pot and cover the whole thing with cold water. That then goes in the fridge overnight. Okay, it's day 2 and our bones have been soaking overnight. This is pretty much what we've got here. You can see the water's quite a deep red, and that's what this soaking process is trying to achieve. It's drawn all the blood out of the bones and out of the marrow so that we're gonna get a much cleaner stock when we boil this. This is essentially soup day. We're making the soup for our tonkotsu ramen, which is kind of almost a 1-day process. So if you had to kind of put it together, day 1 would be soaking the bones, day 2 would be making the soup and also getting started on our shio tare, and then day 3 is going to be just combining everything together. So we need to get rid of this water and put some more water in. You can see kind of how white the bones have become, and this is what we're trying to get to. We're trying to get to a very white paitan, which is a white soup, tonkotsu. If you don't want to go through this soaking process, you can actually skip it. It's just going to make life a little bit harder when we're skimming the scum off the top. The ratio of bones to water is 2:1. So I measured the weight of the bones before I put them in here. Altogether, I had 4.2 kilos. That means I need 8.4 kilos of water to go in here, or 8.4 liters. The soup is kind of 3 stages. The first stage, getting rid of scum. There's going to be scum that comes to the top here, kind of grey scum. Shouldn't be too much because we've got the blood out of the bones already. And that might take about 1.5 hours until the scum that floats to the top becomes white. So that's not actually too bad. The white scum is actually just some coagulated proteins. The grey scum is what's going to taint our paitan or our tonkotsu broth. The second stage is extraction of the proteins and the fats from the bones. And so we want to maintain the water level. That's the second stage. So our initial measurement's quite important. For those first 2 stages, we're going to keep topping up the water so that we help that extraction process. After about 3 hours of that, I'm going to start to reduce this down. And reducing it down, we can see from a measurement how far it's going down until it gets to a concentration that we're happy with. So get rid of the scum, maintain the water level while you're extracting the proteins and fats, and then reduce it down to concentrate the broth. Now I should mention that I'm going to cook this for about 7 hours. That's a long time. You can get away with less because obviously the more bones you have, the more protein and fat is going to be extracted into the soup. And what you're trying to get is a concentrated soup. So if you use more bones and less water, you'll reach that concentration much faster. If you reduce it further, you'll reach that concentration much faster. 8 hours, I think, or even longer, actually gives you a more concentrated broth because you're extracting more from the bones, but obviously your yield will be lower. The longer you extract, the more you'll extract, and then the higher your yield will be. If you want to go shorter, you absolutely can do that, but you'll need to reduce further so your volume will be less. I know it's pretty complicated, but once you do it a few times, it really does become quite easy. And it's quite useful to have a wooden spoon that's going to reach to the bottom of your pot, because you don't want these bones to be burning on the bottom. So I keep the heat quite low to begin with and keep moving the bones around, particularly at the beginning, so that they're not burning on the bottom of the pot. Whenever you come to skim the scum, I take scum off the top and give it another good stir, and then try and skim off some of that scum again. Top up some more water back up to our level. It's looking good. Okay, so now the soup is going. We're gonna start the preparation of our moto tare, shio tare. So if you had to categorize this ramen, what I'm making is a shio, tonkotsu, gyokai. Now what that means is our tare, our moto tare, is going to be salt, a salt-based ramen. The soup is going to be tonkotsu. So the tonkotsu means pork bone. That's the soup we're making over there. And gyokai means seafood flavor. So there's going to be a bit of seafood that we're putting in, firstly to our tare, but also into our flavored oil that we're going to make tomorrow. So this is the dried seafood that's going to be the start of our tare. If these words aren't making any sense to you, please go back and watch the rest of the videos in Ramen School. This is stuff that we've covered before. I'm showing you a slightly different method here. The previous tares that we've made, we've kind of put them into a pot, boiled them over there with a bit of soup. Totally fine to do that. This tare, I'm gonna start with a cold extraction. You actually get, I don't know, slightly different flavors and slightly more extraction by doing this for a longer time. Because the tonkotsu is taking 3 days to get to the end, the soup base, we may as well use that time to get more extraction out of our dried seafood here. This is the dried seafood I'm using for the tare. I've got some scallops, some fish maw, some little dried anchovies, and kombu. Of course, you can use whatever dried seafood you like. If you've got dried shrimps, if you've got anything else that you want to put in there, totally fine as well. This is just what I'm using. I need to prepare these, put them into just a little Tupperware, and then cover them with water, and we'll leave that to sit overnight as well. For this cold extraction, I want to cut the kombu up quite small. This looks good now. You can see that the scum that's coming to the top is kind of just this like white bubbles, and that's totally fine. When there's still gray scum coming, you want to keep skimming that off, but now we can move forward to the extraction process. So we top up the water back up to our 7 centimeters. Put the lid on, heat up high, and keep this at that rolling boil for a few hours. You can immediately see the difference in the broth now. It's gone quite white. We've extracted quite a lot of the fat and protein that is disrupting that clear soup. You know, water is clear. The more fat and protein we emulsify into it, the more the light is spread, and therefore we get our paitan, our white, cloudy soup. And now we can start to reduce it and concentrate that flavor. We've been at about 7 centimeters. I just want to take that down now, probably to about 11.5, 12 centimeters. That'll give us a lovely concentrated broth. Now, this is a really important part in the making of paitan broths. You've got to cool it down as quickly as possible. And that means super, super fast. I'm gonna put some ice into the sink, put this into another container, and keep stirring that in an ice bath until it cools down as much as possible, until it's kind of cool to the touch. Then we can put that in the fridge. And what we're trying to do is bring it through that danger zone. There's a lot of protein and things in this broth. And between 80 degrees and 4 or 5 degrees is a real danger zone for bacteria. And that's gonna change not just the color of our broth, but also the taste of it as well. So we want to get it through that 80 degrees to 5 degrees period as quickly as possible. Ice bath, stir it, get into another container, into the fridge, and we'll be safe. So day 2 is finished. It actually is not very labor intensive, to be honest. But you know, it goes over 3 days because these things take time. We've got our tonkotsu broth in the fridge. We've got the start of our shio tare sitting over there on the bench. And tomorrow we'll be back here to put together our first bowl of tonkotsu ramen. See you then. Our broth is in the fridge. So now we need to move on to the other elements of our tonkotsu ramen. Our tare, and our aromatic oil. The aromatic oil here, obviously for a pork-based ramen, the base of it is going to be pork fat. So I'm gonna chop that up, and then the other ingredients going in, we've got garlic, some spring onion, and these bonito flakes, I'm gonna turn into sort of a bonito powder that's gonna flavor both our oil, and then we might even put some of it into the ramen itself. This is a really popular ingredient for ramen, and it's made very, very simply. I'm using bonito because that's what I have, but obviously you can also use things like mackerel powder. Any of those sort of dried fish make great seafood powders for making thicker ramen broths. Just into a blender or food processor. And here is our fine bonito powder. We'll just jump over to the tare for the time being, because here are the seafood ingredients that we put into our water to infuse. I'm just going to transfer that all to a pot. You can even see the texture of how this water has changed. It's kind of become a little bit gelatinous, a little bit gloopy, and that's a lot of the texture that's been extracted from the kombu. I'm going to top that up with a little bit of water, and then I want to bring it up to heat, not to a boil, on very low heat, for about half an hour until this reaches about 60 degrees. Now for the pork fat. I just want to chop this up finely, transfer that into a pot, and I put that on the stove and render the oil out of this solid fat. While that's rendering, I'll prepare the other ingredients for the oil, which is just some sliced spring onions, and some sliced garlic. It's been about half an hour and this is ready. It's still just warm to the touch. That's all I'm trying to do. It's time to strain it to get our, I guess you'd call it a dashi, a stock, away from the solids. The reason I'm measuring this is because I need to know my proportions here, because the amount of salt that I want to add in is basically a kind of 1:5 ratio. So for every 500 mils of this that I'm putting here, I want about 100 grams of salt. So I've got 750 mils of our very strong dashi. I'm going to add in 150 grams of salt. Now this is obviously a lot of salt that's going into this tare. So I'm going to put it back on the heat, bring it to the boil, adding the salt a little at a time until it comes to the boil. When it comes to the boil, we'll take it off the heat, let it cool down, add a dash of vinegar, and our tare will be done. We've started to get some of the oil out of our fat. Now, we could extract more, but I just want to push this process in a little bit. So I'm going to take what we've got now and I'll start to build our aromatic oil. Now again, I want to start measuring out my yield, I guess, from these kind of things, because that's going to determine the proportion of the other ingredients that we're using. I'll let that pork fat continue to extract over there, but I've got about the amount I need. I've got 300 odd mils of pork fat here. And to that, I want to add some vegetable oil. I think having a mix of animal fats and vegetable fats in your flavored oil is really good because the animal fats have more flavor, but the vegetable oils have a clearer taste, if you know what I mean. It's both heavier with the animal fats and a bit lighter with the vegetable oil. So to 300 mils of pork fat, I'm gonna add 200 mils of vegetable oil. Now I'll transfer all of that back into a pot. I'll add my aromatic ingredients, 30 grams of garlic, 70 grams of spring onion, and also 1 tablespoon of my dried bonito powder. You can already see how aromatic this is gonna be. I'll put that onto the heat, bring it to a boil, I guess, then let it cool back down again, and then we'll have our aromatic oil. You really can't overstate the importance of the aromatic oil to the ramen making process. When you get to this stage and you smell how this smells, you think, wow, I'm making ramen. Well, it's been a process, but we got here. We're finally ready to assemble the ramen. And kind of here's where the lay of the land is. Over here, I've got my water for boiling the noodles. Behind that, I've got a pot for actually warming the bowl, because having a warm bowl is really important for ramen. Otherwise, the soup and everything will cool down far too quickly. I've got my toppings, which are some chashu, ajitama. This is the kikurage, the woodier fungus that's added for a bit of crunch into tonkotsu ramen. Also sort of color contrast as well, because tonkotsu generally is quite a white soup, depending on how you're making it, of course. And then you've got this nice black fungus to give color contrast there. Some menma. I'm gonna add a spoon of our bonito powder to the top of the ramen as well. Some nori, spring onions, and we have our elements of ramen coming together. Soup, tare, aromatic oil, toppings, noodles. Soup, tare, aromatic oil, toppings, noodles. 5 elements of ramen. Now these ladles are kind of specifically for ramen. Most professional ladles will be printed with their capacity. So this is a 10 ml capacity ladle that I can use for my oil, a 20 ml capacity ladle that I can use for my tare. This is a 120 ml capacity ladle that I can use for my soup. So I know exactly how much soup I'm putting into the bowl. And that allows you to get consistency, whether you're making 2 bowls of ramen or 20 or 2,000. That's gonna allow you to know exactly how much of these ingredients you're adding. I forgot to show you our stock. This is what our stock looks like, our soup base. Oh, it is super, super, super gelatinous. Look at that. I'm not mixing this with anything, so I'm just gonna heat up as much stock as I think I'll need. A few ladles there for my first bowl of ramen. And before this comes up to the boil on the stove, I'm gonna make sure everything else is ready. The order is kind of the soup and the toppings need to be in the right places at the right time before you start the noodles. The noodles are only gonna take 2.5 minutes, depending on kind of the firmness of the noodle for our final bowl of ramen. The bowl should be warm, and then we're gonna add in our ingredients. So let's get started. Chashu first. Now, it is a lot of work, but this 3 days has gone into one bowl of ramen, but the same amount of work goes into 10 or 20 or 200. There you go, tonkotsu ramen.